brand new study raises major questions about everything we thought we knew about bass and their color vision. Based on the research, should you just stick to a few proven colors? Or is there more payoff than ever for finding the magic color? Today I'm breaking down the science and showing you how to make better color choices for your lures. So bass vision has been studied pretty extensively, and we do know they have color vision, and we also know that lake clarity, how muddy the water is, how sunny it is, whether the water is green or blue, if there are a lot of waves, all of that impacts what they see and how they see it. In addition, we also know that bass only have two types of color receptors, red and green, whereas humans, we have three types, red, green, and blue. So the colors they see and how they see them are a little bit different than human vision. So I've broken all that down before in two prior videos. If you want more info on that, have full links down in the description. But here's what changed. A new study just put out in June of 2025 shows that bass vision, our human vision is pretty fixed. For fish, it actually changes. The receptors, how they see color, it literally can change from day to day, from season to season. So what they're seeing today, how they see your lure color today versus how they see it tomorrow versus they see it the next season could be totally different. So first, let me dive into the study. I'll run you quickly through that. And it kind of reaffirms one of the seasons that we thought there was a major color shift. Definitely see signs of that. And then let's get into it after the study. Does this mean color is now more important or less important? And then taking it to the real world, how do you use this information to pick better lure colors to catch more fish? So starting off with the study, it's a peer-reviewed study. It was published in June of 2025. It was published in the Journal of Experimental Biology, and it was done by scientists at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana. So this study isn't an actual study itself. It's a meta-analysis of 36 studies all about teleost. And teleosts are just a type of fish that bass belong to. It's a bony structured fish, fairly common, and it looked at 36 studies looking at how fish color vision can change. So to begin with, it was known that fish vision is pretty adaptable. Obviously, we know the water goes from clear to muddy, and there's some days are really bright, and some days are more cloudy, and all the waves and everything, that basically they have to adjust their vision to be able to see in these different environments. Now, what this study really dives into are actual internal changes in the fish and how that impacts vision. And we're talking about internal hormone changes like spawning season, changing the diet, or maturation as fish get older and they start to go from juveniles to adults, how those hormones actually impact their vision. Now, what this falls under is phenotypic plasticity. And basically that means that these fish are changing their vision based on the environment, not changing their genes, but actually changing how they're expressed. Science in general is kind of getting a better handle on this, and we're understanding we have genes. You have a gene for blue eyes or green eyes, maybe red hair or brown hair, but how these genes are expressed, basically how they're turned on and off, that can actually be adjusted. You're born as a redhead or brown hair or blue eye, but on some of these genes, they can, based on the environment, your conditions, they can be turned on more or less. With the vision here, what's happening is there's a protein in the eyes, opsin, that basically adjusts the light sensitivity, what colors that they're more sensitive to, that they see better or see less. So basically with this, that protein, they can do one of two things. One, they can actually adjust the amount of cone cells, like red or green cone cells that they have, or in those particular ones, they can adjust how sensitive, say, the green or the red ones are, so they're even more pronounced, more sensitive to certain colors versus others, depending on situations. Now, what they measured in these wide range of studies was how much fish vision changed in 5 different color categories. So UV, red, blue, and green receptors, and then also low light, or like rods, which are blacks and grayscales. And basically they looked at not whether the shift was plus or minus, but how much did it shift and how many deviations away. And basically a strong one was 0.8 of a deviation. So we're talking a very significant shift, whether it went less or more. Which of these saw big shifts in their reception to them? So a couple of things that they saw. One was the fact that external stimuli, like muddiness of the water, the clarity or how bright it was, those effects on vision weren't near as strong as the hormonal ones. So the internal shifts, like the change in maturation when they're growing up or around the spawn and stuff, those those internal ones, the hormone shifts, were typically much stronger on average than the external ones. And then the other thing they saw was the fact that this was really widespread, that basically it wasn't isolated to just a couple species or a little niche part of these fish. Basically all these teleosts, which bass are part of, it's very common and very significant. So basically it's pretty safe to assume that most species that fall into these categories are probably seeing pretty significant shifts in their color vision. Now, bass don't have the blue cones like we talked about before, and then they also talked about, UV sensitivity. And the big thing you saw there was when they're maturing, a lot of times going from juveniles, small fish, and they're eating on little plankton and these tiny little things, that it seems like UV light is important, and they might be recruiting like blue cones to help with UV on the fish that have the blue cones. So that's one that they saw a big shift on. That's a hormonal change. More specifically to bass fishermen, though, the one that they saw the biggest change, and this is across all of them, the big change was red sensitivity, and it was directly impacted with hormonal changes, and that's typically around the spawn. So what have we always seen with bass fishing? We always talk about red lures, how in the spring, how they really play. Well, this data tends to back that up, that there's a huge red spike. Now, it didn't say if it was more or less and when the timing was, like the fact that when they started spawning, it quickly went down, they were less sensitive, or right before it was more sensitive. But they noted across all these fish that the red sensitivity changed very dramatically with hormone changes, and this was typically around the spawn. Now, the other thing they noted was the low light vision, those rods, the blacks and grayscales. This was the least affected. This was the least plastic. Basically, that low light, if it's muddy water, rainy, dark conditions, that one stayed pretty consistent. And that probably makes sense there because you're always going to need to be able to see that. And those are usually shorter windows versus prolonged periods. So that stayed pretty stable, whereas the main driver, like I said, the biggest change they would see was that red. Now, unfortunately, this study is kind of like your favorite show on Netflix or something, and you only have season 1, it debuts, you're really getting into it, and then they leave you with a cliffhanger, and you're like, man, I can't, oh my God, I have to wait to find out what happened. That's kind of what this one went to. They basically showed, yeah, this is a huge thing. Fish vision is changing very considerably throughout the year. We're not sure if this happens in just a day or if this takes several days or half of a day, and then how long it lasts, how much the sensitivity, if it's like increased, do they see more red, do they see less red? We don't have these answers, but we know this is a big thing. We need to look deeper in this, study more species on specifics. So for bass, it could be, they see red way, way more. They see it maybe way, way less. That it blends into the background more. That's why they don't see it as well. That's why red works in the spring. Or maybe they see it way, way better. So the visibility, they can see it from a lot farther away and they're coming to it. I do know in personal experience, red in the spring for me, guiding at Fork over the years, we always saw it was kind of pre-spawn. Red, that bright red, oranges and stuff got really good. And once they went on bed, it kind of, shifted away. It wasn't as much. So there's a lot to be done here. But basically, it's left us thinking that all of a sudden, what we thought historically was color was just fixed. They have a fixed vision. From one lake to the next, from one day to the next, it could change considerably. So what's this mean for fishing? Is color more important? Or is it less important now? You can pretty much approach lure color in 2 different ways. One is keep it simple, just a few basic proven colors, or the other side is the tinker approach of experimenting in finite little colors, differences of watermelon with purple flake versus gold flake versus red flake. Those small differences can make a huge difference, and when you find it, it can be a jackpot. Let's look at the keep it simple approach first. And basically, to me, there's core colors. The reds, that's the first category. Purples fall into that as well. Second category is greens, and then you look at the blacks, which blue also falls into black, and then white, which chartreuse kind of falls into there, and then you have translucent, which is stuff that's hard to see. It's pretty see-through, not much color. And then finally is flash, so the chromes and gold. So green, red, black, white, shiny, or clear. So that's 6 colors already. So even if it's simple, it's already complex. People who advocate that approach say, I mean, that's already a lot. I still have to decide between those. And now with this research, it kind of says the biology is against you. The fact that if I spend all this time finding the hot color, it could change at any given time. Their vision changes, so what's good today might not even last. And then you look at the way the pros do it. You know, a lot of the top pros, and I would say the majority of them, keep it pretty simple. They have main color categories, and when you look at what wins tournaments, it's typically the technique and the location. When you look at the top 10 galleries, if drop shotting's the key, one guy will be using green pumpkin, another has a shade of watermelon, somebody else has morning dawn, somebody else uses just a natural matte sort of color. So that would tend to lead you that color's probably not that important. And then the other thing that a lot of people will say is, you know what's more important than anything? Confidence. Whether you're playing sports and you have confidence you're going to make the free throw, fishing's the same thing. If you're confident, you fish harder, you fish better. Plus, you only have so much time in a given day. The more time you're actually fishing and less tinkering around, the more time you're actually making casts and you're casting well. Keep it simple, stupid. That's the way to go. On the flip side of this is the tinker approach. And it does say that, man, color changes a lot. So from one day to the next, if the bass's vision is changing, what they want might change a lot today. And yesterday, everybody was throwing, say, red crankbaits. Well, now it's changed. They're starting to move up on the beds, or it's changed because conditions are changing, and all of a sudden what they want could be totally different. Everybody on the lake's throwing red. If I go with blue or green now, maybe I'd stumble onto something. Plus, we've all seen days where, you know, color has made a major difference. It seems like one guy in the boat is throwing watermelon candy when everybody else has watermelon red, and that purple flake, that difference seems to be all the difference. And once you change to it, yeah, it makes a big difference. And pressured fisheries, having subtle differences could make a difference. It's fun to experiment. You know, some guys, they like to mess around with it. That's half the fun of trying different things, different shades. And there's still that hope based on this that, yeah, maybe general patterns might get you in the ballpark. So say you switch from red to green pumpkin, yeah, you generally have the right color, so you're getting some. But this approach says, as much as it changes and I tweak it, it's going to change day to day. I may hit on something that all of a sudden I get the right color and go from red not catching anything to the guy that switched to green pumpkin catching some, and he's happy with it. But I might switch to green pumpkin candy, and all of a sudden with that purple and green flake in there, all of a sudden I nail them. And I turn on fish that weren't biting at all, and I really get the whole school going, so I can truly hit the jackpot. Both sides of that debate have some legitimate reasoning behind them. You can make a good argument for either side. And the truth is, some days the one approach versus the other is going to matter more. So for your fishing, what do I recommend that you do? What am I personally going to do? Basically, to me, the core colors, I think most of the time, that's what makes sense. And basically, if you take out the colors that kind of run in duplicates, like fish see black and blue about the same, chartreuse and white about the same, and we also found out that they kind of confuse white, blue, yellow, and black all together. To me, there are some core buckets, and the differences when you go from one bucket to the other, that's where you're going to see the biggest changes. So if I'm going to tweak my colors, I'm going to look at just a few core buckets. And basically that means to me, red or green, put black, white, blue, yellow, chartreuse, all that kind of in one bucket. Again, and then flashy, like chrome or gold, and then clear, that translucent, they can't see it. So basically red, green, white or black, chrome, or clear. That's where I'm going to make these big changes. So in the real world, basically on lures, I'm going to make these big changes. If it's a square bill crankbait or a bladed jig, you know, say it's the pre-spawn, I'm trying red. If it's not working, then go with maybe the green, something like a more natural green color. I could switch it over to shad pattern, which is white, or go dark with the black, either one of those. I could try to go with more flash, so go with a chrome or a gold. And then sometimes you go with that translucent where they really can't, if I'm thinking they're getting too much of a look at it, those big swings right there, that's where I'm going to tweak a little bit, and I'm not going to start going into red versus orange versus putting purple flake in there. Sometimes I'm not going to try to dial it in. I'm going to go with those big swings and all of a sudden see if I start to get bit. So when do you slow down and tinker? When do you play around with it? Now, I think this comes into a couple different situations. One, if you're fishing the same area. Say you're in a tournament and you're spending 2-3 days or the full day in an area. That's where all of a sudden, if you make that switch from, say, green to white to red, and all of a sudden they start biting red, that's the one that works, and you're staying in that same area fishing it quite a bit, or you're coming back to a spot day after day. Say it's your home lake, you have a week off vacation, it's spring break, and you're going to be out there every single afternoon fishing. Well, yeah, if it seems like red's the deal, now I'm going to tweak it. Let's go with darker red. Let's go with something with some different color, maybe some gold flake in it, vary that up a little bit. And then fishing pressure, if an area is really getting pounded, whether you're fishing a lot like we talked about before, staying in the same spot, or the lake's just getting pounded in general, I think fish are going to be more selective, and it's going to have to be something that either blends in more or looks more natural or more like what they're eating. That's where tweaking and playing around a little bit and dialing it in, that's where the big swings, if you get kind of a right color, maybe it gets you a few bites, but a lot of times in that case, if you can dial it in, that's going to be a payoff. And then finally, I think here's the biggest reason to tinker and play around is when you have multiple people in the boat. I saw this so much when I was guiding. It was typically me with 2 guide customers. And you would see that if you were throwing lipless crankbaits, if that was kind of the bite, and one guy would have red, one would have gold, and maybe I threw like a sexy shad, a natural one, you could really see the difference in it, and you can experiment. It's fun to see what different colors work, and a lot of times that gives you a really chance to dial it in. If you're by yourself, you don't have enough time to constantly switching, you're going to be down on the bottom of the boat. But if there's multiple people, that's a great way to do that general change of the red versus green versus white. And then once you figure out it's red, dial that in to find the specific color and maybe hit the jackpot of what's really working. So once you figure out the color, you also have to figure out the vibration and the sound. Check out this video about what sounds call bass in. Go deeper on colors on these videos, or get into my full science playlist here. Talks about the science and the studies to help you catch more bass.